Tonight on Reporting Scotland. Just £2.50 for a week's worth of alcohol. A charity publishes the figures as legal arguments resume over the Scottish Government's plans to impose a minimum price. A former head of the Navy says the UK government must come clean that it's a lack of money that's holding up a shipbuilding programme on the Clyde. Police Scotland hopes to boost the number of Muslim women joining the force by introducing a hijab to the uniform.
I actually wanted to join the police force when I was younger, but my mum was concerned because I do wear the headscarf. My mum was concerned that perhaps I might face some sort of racism or Islamophobia while on the street.
Also in the programme, one of the country's most successful runners says there could be as many as a dozen Scottish athletes going to Rio with Team GB. Good evening. On average, £2.50 will buy you a cappuccino in a coffee shop. It's also the price you pay for enough alcohol to reach the recommended maximum weekly intake of booze. Well, that disparity and any effect on the nation's health is at the heart of a prolonged and bitter legal battle which resumed today between the Scottish Government and the drinks industry. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Rival Alderson, joins me now.
Jackie, it's almost 4 years since the Scottish Parliament legislated to impose a minimum unit price for alcohol. The government later fixed that at 50p. But the policy remains on the shelf because of protracted legal proceedings brought by the Scotch Whisky Association. As they got underway, the charity Alcohol Focus Scotland published a survey on just how cheap alcohol can be. Researchers found cider at the equivalent price of 18p per unit. That would almost treble if the government's policy were introduced. Lager costing as little as 26p a unit, meaning it would double in price. The survey also showed wine could be bought for 32p a unit and vodka for 36p. Both would have to increase in price significantly. This has reignited the arguments before the Court of Session, which resumed its hearing today. The price of most drinks hasn't risen in the 5 years since the last Alcohol Focus survey. In a recovering economy, that makes it relatively more affordable. But the charity says in that period, delays to the implementation of the minimum pricing policy have led to further hospital admissions, crime and deaths caused by alcohol.
Hundreds of people would not be dead, hundreds of families not grieving if this policy had been implemented. And fundamentally, the Scotch Whisky Association membership have to look inward and ask themselves, are they prepared to continue to put profits before the health of the people of Scotland?
In court, the government lawyer argued alcohol consumption has recently risen and ministers are concerned it could be a trend. But the Scotch Whisky Association said while it supports efforts to reduce the harm caused by alcohol, the government's legislation won't address it.
We believe that minimum unit pricing won't tackle the core of the problem. It won't tackle those people in Scotland who drink to harmful and hazardous levels. There are better, much more targeted approaches. Minimum unit pricing is a blanket approach that doesn't differentiate between those who drink responsibly, i.e. most people in Scotland, and those who drink harmfully or hazardously and have a problem with alcohol.
The SWA is urging the court to rule the government's policy would go against the EU's free trade laws and minimum pricing should be scrapped. Well, this debate's all about a unit of alcohol. Many people, though, have a difficulty in envisaging what that is. So let me put this debate into context. The recommended maximum amount of alcohol we should drink each week is 14 units. But the survey found a 3-litre bottle of strong cider selling for £3.99. At that price, you could get a week and a half's intake of alcohol for less than £4. And the government argues that's causing harm to society. Jackie.
Thank you very much, Riel. The RMT union says ScotRail guards have voted overwhelmingly in favour of strike action in a dispute over driver-only trains. No timetable has been set for industrial action. That's due to be considered soon by the union executive. But ScotRail management questioned their support for a strike.
Nearly half of our people are not in favour of strike action, and that's no surprise. I have already gone out and guaranteed the number of jobs of our employees, that no one will lose their jobs. pay and terms and conditions will be guaranteed, as well as the future of the role of a conductor in Scotland.
It's about safety. We obviously want to ensure that Scotland's trains run safely. By removing the guard from the train, then that ensures that Scotland's trains does not run safely, and if, God forbid, there is a collision or a derailment, there will be no one responsible on the train in order to ensure that passengers leave the train safely.
A former head of the Navy has said the UK government must come clean and admit a lack of money is delaying a shipbuilding programme on the Clyde. Unions have warned that if work on the new warships doesn't start soon, hundreds of jobs could be put at risk. Here's our business correspondent, David Henderson.
It's here they build the Navy's warships, like this one, under wraps while it's under construction. But for workers on the Clyde yards, the future's far from certain.
The question on their minds is this: when will they start building the next generation of Type 26 frigates, massive vessels designed to hunt submarines? They had expected to start cutting steel for those ships here later this year, but that timetable appears to have slipped.
MPs want to know why, prompting this broadside from a former naval chief and Labour peer.
There's almost no money extra available this year, and we are really strapped next year. The government aren't coming clean about that. I think if they did, people understand. The British people aren't stupid. But to pretend that actually, oh no, we're going to order all of these, we know these are really important, but there are little problems of design and things, is, I'm afraid, being economical with the actuality.
It's been a busy few years at the Clyde shipyards, building sections of the UK's 2 aircraft carriers. They've been moved to Rosyth in Fife for final assembly. Now they're building much smaller ships for the Royal Navy, 5 of these offshore patrol vessels. But that work can only last a few years. The government said 13 frigates will be built by BAE Systems here on the Clyde. When they'll start is unclear. Unions warn a delay could be catastrophic, but the company made clear today they don't want to lay off staff.
We are fortunate in the sense that we do have the carrier programme and the submarine programme, and we would look to explore how we could use our employees on the Clyde to support those programmes if there were to be any break in load on the Clyde.
The UK government says it's spending £8 billion in the next decade on warships, much of it here. But that's unlikely to calm its critics. David Henderson, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Police Scotland is preparing to introduce a hijab as an optional part of its uniform to encourage Muslim women to join up. The force is studying a specific design of headscarf like those used by London's Metropolitan Police. Suzanne Allen reports.
Glasgow, home to the majority of the Asian population in Scotland. The hijab is often seen here in the Pollock Shields area of the city. It's a headscarf worn by Muslim women, covering their head and neck but leaving the face clear. London's Metropolitan Police have had it as part of their uniform for over a decade.
4% of the population in Scotland come from black and Asian communities. Police Scotland says it wants to reflect this in its 17,000 strong workforce. But to do that, it would need to recruit 650 people from these communities. The number that applied last year, 127.
You thought about joining the police then?
At Amina, the Muslim Women's Resource Centre, the idea is under discussion.
I actually wanted to join the police force when I was younger, but my mum was concerned, because I do wear the headscarf, my mum was concerned that perhaps I might face some sort of racism or Islamophobia while on the street. And I think that is a cause for concern as well.
When young girls and families will look and see people, women walking in the street with the hijab on, they might also think that, yeah, I can also join the police, why not?
Generally, I think there is some stigma attached to being a part of the police as well, and how that's viewed. So, and then, without a doubt, there have been issues around kind of racism within the police as well. So I think all of these have contributed to perhaps lower uptake from the BME community.
And that image is something the police says it's working on.
Do you know, there's a whole series of work going on within the proactive recruitment team, and it really is about outreach and engagement first and foremost with communities, as I've said, who perhaps haven't seen policing as a career option before. And when we build those relationships and people have community trust and confidence in us, then I'm hopeful that the face of Scottish policing will start to change.
It seems it'll take more than making the hijab part of the uniform to get Muslim women to join up. But it's a start. Suzanne Allen reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Still to come on tonight's programme, how a space probe, partly made in Glasgow, is trying to prove Einstein's theory about gravitational waves.
In sport, Scottish athletes impress on the world stage. The signs are looking good for the most Scots in Team GB for over 40 years. Full details on running the road to Rio coming up.
The EU referendum debate has just over 2 weeks to go. The argument to leave or remain is raging in some parts of the UK. But in Scotland, it's far less visible. So we sent our political correspondent, Glenn Campbell, in search of the Scottish campaign.
Today in England, Boris and his bus are battling for leave, with David Cameron countering for remain. While Nigel Farage is campaigning for out, the Liberal Democrats are among those arguing for us to stay in. Meanwhile, in Scotland, there's nothing like the same energy.
You seen much of the campaign?
No, not seen any of the campaign.
Anybody been at your door?
No.
Leaflets? One from the government, yeah.
Like, there's not much going on. Nothing really coming in the door.
Election fatigue could be one factor. We've had the European Parliament election, the independence referendum, the UK general election, the Scottish Parliament election, and now this EU referendum. That's 5 big votes in less than 2 years. That's not to say nothing's happening. A lone leafleter targeting Edinburgh commuters this morning, on the day Holyrood journalists heard this campaigner argue that leaving the EU would make the Scottish Parliament more powerful.
Agriculture will come back under your control, but in fishing, and you start to manage fishing areas, then I think you have a real sign of the industry being totally transformed. I think there will be real gains for Scotland there.
But the Remain side say staying in the EU is better for trade and jobs.
All of our business organisations, our farmers' union, our whisky industry, all of these industry bodies are saying we want to stay part of it. Don't take us out of it. Don't rip us out of it. That benefits all of us.
2 years ago, the independence referendum was far more intense.
There was so much vigour to that campaign. The public were so engaged and so involved. And actually in Scotland, you'd barely know there was even a EU referendum about to take place.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's for a few reasons. I think that the EU is not something that people feel so passionately about as they do about perhaps Scottish nationalism or British nationalism. And I think it's very one-sided as well.
But both sides are arguing their case in local debates like this one held by the Church of Scotland, which you can attend if you're anywhere near their London outpost. Glenn Campbell, reporting Scotland.
Flash flooding has affected parts of Scotland, disrupting roads and some rail services around the country. Let's look at some pictures that were taken in Pennycook in Midlothian, where heavy rain led to streams of water running along roads and pavements, as you can see, entering some properties in the town. Train services between Inverness and Perth were disrupted for some time due to flooding on the line. Services later returned to normal. The weather coming up, but first a look at other stories from across the country. A second oil summit featuring industry leaders and politicians is to be held in Aberdeen. Trade unions and academics will also attend the meeting later this month. A report earlier this week said more than 4 in 10 of the UK's oil and gas firms plan further cost cutting. The team behind Scotland's biggest solar farm, which has been unveiled today, believes there's huge potential for the technology. 55,000 panels have been installed on a 70-acre site between Dundee and Perth. They'll be able to provide enough electricity to power around 3,500 homes.
It's really key to Scotland to have both solar and wind, which is currently the dominant technology, to balance the grid. So we get solar in the summer, we get wind in the winter predominantly, and if you put them together, it helps create more of a balanced grid.
Police are investigating the deliberate disturbance of bird of prey nests in Moy Forest, south of Inverness. 4 buzzard nests and 1 goshawk nest have been abandoned by the adult birds, with chicks left to die. Wildlife crime officers have urged anyone with information on such illegal activity to contact them. Scots communities are being encouraged to apply for public funding now if they are considering a land buyout. It follows the local buyout by the Southwest Mull and Iona Development Company of 1,900 acres of forestry land from the Forestry Commission. The island community has plans to harvest the trees and develop the land. Scottish postmen and women have taken part in a celebration in Edinburgh to mark 500 years of UK postal services. A 19th century horse-drawn mail coach led the procession of mail workers, many in historical uniforms, through the capital. Back now to the EU referendum, and tonight we're looking at the role our representatives play in the European Parliament. Well, our political correspondent Nick Eardley has been to Strasbourg, where he's been meeting Scottish MEPs to find out just what impact this month's vote may have.
Strasbourg, the official home of the European Parliament. You might be more used to hearing about Brussels in the EU referendum debate, but it's here that the only directly elected EU politicians have their say. Scotland elects 6 people every 5 years to sit here. The leader of the SNP group, Ian Hudson, knows the institution pretty well. He's been an MEP for nearly 20 years. He argues it's building bridges across Europe, which means we should stay.
The reality being in the European Parliament that no grouping, no nationality has an outright majority. In theory, the 6 members from Scotland can influence and build a majority for key Scottish interests.
Many disagree. One member of the Scottish contingent, UKIP's David Coburn, wants us to put him out of a job in a couple of weeks' time.
Here, Britain is 1/27th of the whole shebang. Well, that's not much good. Scotland's voice is greater in the United Kingdom because we are 1/4 of the voice.
Depending on which side you listen to, the EU is responsible for as much as 62% of UK law, or as little as 13%. Then there's the question of who actually makes those laws. There's the European Commission, it's based in Brussels and is the civil service of the EU where laws are born. There's the Parliament here, where 751 members from across the EU can scrutinise and approve or reject legislation. There's the European Council, which is made up of member states. It's the chance for national governments to have their say. In this case, it's the UK, which represents Scotland. And then there's the European Court of Justice, which makes sure that all the rules are followed. If we leave the EU in a couple of weeks, that'll change. So what would a British exit mean for Scotland's relationship with the EU?
Because we'd be doing business with them anyway. We just wouldn't have to pay all this money in, and we'd make our own decisions about farming, make our own decisions about fishing. We'll have the same single farm payment, but it will come directly from the British government.
While there have been examples of things that have happened that didn't suit us, it's far better to be involved and to have a say rather than to be on the outside and be buffeted along in any case while other people are setting the agenda.
Will the British flag continue to fly with those of other member states here? That decision's down to voters in a couple of weeks' time. Nick Eardley, reporting Scotland in Strasbourg.
What about the British flag at the Olympics? Well, Rona's got some hopeful news on that.
I do. Thank you very much, Jackie. Good evening to you. Scotland's most successful distance runner, Liz McColgan, says there could be as many as 12 Scots athletes in Team GB for Rio. Now, that number is an impressive step up from recent games and more than double the number in London. There are 4 Scots already named in the team in marathon and 10,000 metres. Scotland's Director of Coaching, Roger Harkin, says selection for Rio will also reap benefits in years to come.
Scottish athletes are shining on the world stage, with Olympic selection a reality for many more than in recent years.
I think that we have a great opportunity to have maybe 12 Scots in the team. That's from 400 hurdles, 800, 15, 5k, 10k and marathon. There's good depth in what we're doing now in athletics in Scotland, and it's just great to see.
12 Scots would compare extremely well to recent games. In fact, we have to turn the clock back 44 years to Munich to find a dozen Scots in Team GB. And it seems that the road to Rio is bonding the top Scots.
You'll find that if you look on the social media that the Scottish athletes, Lindsay, Laura, Ailish, Andrew, when they all perform, they tweet and congratulate each other. So although they're being competitive, they're actually very, very supportive of each other.
Andrew, not yet a household name, is Andrew Butchert. He has twice broken the 36-year-old record of Scots distance great Nat Muir.
My coach, Derek Easton, used to train with him, and he's always said to me, oh, Nat Muir did this, Nat Muir did that, and now to beat Nat Muir, yeah, it's great.
Butchert has burst into contention this year, posting Olympic qualifying times twice, but the stiff challenge of Team GB trials lies ahead.
I'm up against likes of Mo Farah, so it's always going to be hard, but there's 3 spots, so I have a good opportunity. I don't want to let this one slip.
There's a long way from selection to the podium, but making the team for Rio is the first step on the ultimate Olympic journey.
The Olympics have a special aura about them, and I think athletes have to get there and learn to mix it first. Maybe their second Olympics is the best. I'm really happy with the work that's been done by the athletes and the coaches. They're really stepping up to the plate and making a big push for this Olympic Games.
The Olympic trials take place 24th to 26th of June. Team GB will be named on July the 13th.
The Scotland women's national football team took a step closer to qualifying for the 2017 European Championship with a 1-0 win over Belarus in Minsk. Joe Love was the scorer. The Scots now sit top of the qualifying group with 1 match left to play. Their final game is in September away to Iceland. The Commonwealth Games bronze medalist Erin Davis will face a medical panel tomorrow to assess whether she's eligible to take part in disability sport. The 15-year-old swimmer from Shetland became the youngest ever Commonwealth Games medalist at Glasgow 2014. Davis has Perth's disease, which affects her hip bones and joints. She was told by a classification panel in April that her impairment was not serious enough for her to compete. We'll bring you news of that when we get it. And that's it for tonight, Jackie.
Cheers, Rona. Now, they're one of the great mysteries of the universe predicted by Albert Einstein and proved to exist in experiments just earlier this year. Well, now a space probe, partly created at Glasgow University, is involved in the search for gravitational waves. And according to the European Space Agency, the mission is going better than expected. Here's our science correspondent, Kenneth MacDonald.
It's the biggest of big ideas, an observatory in space that can see ripples in space and time, that can hear stars colliding. And at its heart, an interferometer created in Glasgow to measure very small distances indeed.
It's a system of optics, mirrors and laser beams, and it's designed to measure a distance, in this case, in a distance between floating proof masses and LISA Pathfinder, but it's designed to do it very, very accurately.
How accurately?
It can measure changes of distance to about a millionth of a metre.
The LISA Pathfinder mission took one of Glasgow's devices into orbit round the Sun. The first results are even better than expected.
The goal of LISA Pathfinder is to show that we can take this cube, we can put it into a spacecraft, we can launch it out to space, and we can then set it free. And it's so free that there's no forces acting on it.
And that means it'll be able to sense those tiny gravitational waves. They were first discovered here on Earth just last year by firing laser beams that were several kilometres long. The full LISA mission will have laser arms 5 million kilometres in length. But when?
The nominal timing of that is 2034, but I think with the excitement, partly because of the ground-based experiments, the results that came out in February, and partly because of what we've heard today, I think the push is on to try and accelerate that. And I think there's a scientific imperative to accelerate it, and there's now a technical justification to underpin that. So I think full steam ahead.
And the point? To reveal what's been going on behind other galaxies, far across the universe. Kenneth MacDonald, reporting Scotland.
And now here's Shelley Joffrey with details of Scotland 2016.
Tonight, as David Cameron and Nigel Farage face a public grilling, we hear what MEPs in Strasbourg and young voters in Glasgow think of the referendum campaign. And we're in California for the latest on Hillary Clinton's bid for the Democratic presidential nomination. Join me over on BBC Two at 10:30.
Well, we saw that flash flooding earlier in the programme, so let's get the weather from Judith.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Yes, good evening to you. Two sides of summer today, some beautiful warm sunshine, but those high temperatures help to trigger off some rather fierce thunderstorms, certainly across northern Scotland and parts of the southeast. Here's the earlier radar. You can see those heavy thundery downpours in the north, some further south as well, but actually many places escaped largely dry, and that's what we're going to see this evening, a fairly dry end of the day. We still have that yellow weather warning in force for those showers across the north and southeast, but they all fade away tonight. Cloud starts to increase from the east, mistiness to that cloud as well, pushing in across the mainland. Some mist too for the west coast. We've not seen that for a while. Temperatures very much on the mild side. In the south, further north, just that wee bit fresher. So tomorrow dawns fairly grey with some mist and low cloud, but actually fairly quickly that all burns off to the east coast and it brightens up nicely with some warm sunshine once again. Now, high temperatures across southwest Scotland could trigger off the odd heavy shower, but I do think they will be mainly a high ground feature. 22 Celsius expected for Dumfries and Galloway. Some lovely sunshine for Kintyre, Arran, the Inner Hebrides and the Glasgow area. The odd shower for the West Highlands, again triggered off by the high temperatures, a high ground feature too. Maybe a greyness to the skies for parts of the Western Isles tomorrow. Good sunny spells, high temperatures across the northwest, maybe not as high today as we saw today, but across the northern Isles still it should brighten up for a time after a grey start. Grey skies for much of eastern coastal areas. Nagging easterly breezes, northeasterly breezes, keeping things very much on the cool side. But you don't have to come too far inland to see the warm temperatures once again. So those showers we'll see during the course of the afternoon will die away. So all in all, really a lovely end to the day. Some warm evening sunshine and it stays dry overnight with cloud returning. Now, if we take a look at the pressure chart, you can see high pressure still dominating on Thursday, but a gradual switch in our weather as we start to draw in more fresher air and Atlantic lows bringing rain for Friday. But actually for Thursday, 1 or 2 showers, yes, it brightens up nicely and some warm sunshine. It really is going to be quite a pleasant day. Highs of 23 Celsius. That's your forecast.
Thank you very much, Judith. And now a reminder of tonight's main news. Figures revealed by an alcohol charity suggest it's possible to buy the recommended maximum weekly intake of alcohol for just £2.50. They were published as an appeal court. Judges in Edinburgh resumed their hearing on the Scottish Government's policy of imposing a maximum unit price for alcohol. Mike Ashley, the founder of Sports Direct, faced MPs today and admitted there were what he called issues at his retail empire. It followed accusations by a union that there was a culture of fear at the company's warehouse in Derbyshire. And that's Reporting Scotland. We'll have our late bulletin, of course, just after the 10 o'clock news. Until then, from all the team across the country, good evening.